Well, I kicked off a new series last week entitled Fast Food Christianity. And I opened up with a passage, she doesn't have this back there, out of Psalms chapter 13. And it was David, and I feel like David is totally reflecting the way most of us are, even as believers. And it says, "How long, Lord, are you going to forget me? Are you going to forget me forever? How long are you going to hide your face from me? How long do I have to wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long is my enemy going to triumph over me? How long?" This concept of why? Why doesn't everything happen like that? Why isn't everything quick? Why don't I get everything I want when I want it? Why is it taking so long for things to change? If the Bible says I'm victorious, how come it doesn't seem like I'm walking in that victory? Why does it seem like the world's got it better than me and I'm serving a big God? And I think the reality is we're looking at things from the wrong perspective. We look at everything through our natural lens and our carnal mind. And we've got to begin to tap into the Spirit of God. And last week I talked about waiting on the Lord. And it is a lost art for Christians. But it's time that we regain the ability to sit in God's presence and sit and spend time in His Word and allow Him to speak to us. Actually, let me rephrase that. And allow ourselves to hear what He's been trying to speak to us all day and all night and over again, because He's not withholding anything. Unfortunately, we're just not waiting on Him and taking time to listen. And so today I want to open up with Matthew chapter 28. Kind of fitting, coming after Justin sharing about the Gideons, but verses 19 and 20 says, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." So my title today is The Long Line of Discipleship. The Long Line of Discipleship. And the reason why I entitled that is because if you're anything like me, I hate long lines. And I will, if I'm at the bank, I got to pick and choose which line's the shortest, And I mentioned last week, I'll literally leave a drive-through if the line's too long. Went and got the car wash, yesterday, and immediately I'm like, which line's the shortest? Because that's our mindset. We want to go through and we want to get the results as quick as possible. But when it comes to discipleship, it's a long line. And it's not a long line because there's a whole bunch of people in it. It's a long line because it's a long journey. From the day you make Jesus Christ the Lord of your life to the day you die, you should be in this process of being discipled, becoming more and more like Him. But most of us look at that and we at that scripture about going in all the world, and we take it as, let's go make some converts. Now, conversion is good. That's the starting point. That's the seed that gets planted. There's no transformation that will happen unless the seed is planted. But discipleship is a whole lot more than just saying a sinner's prayer. Becoming a believer and a follower of Jesus Christ, when you make Jesus the Lord of your life, when you make that commitment, that's like the launching. That's the starting point. But for too many people, it's the starting and the ending. They make Jesus Christ the Lord of their life, so they say with their words, and then that's all they do. And they're happy and satisfied with knowing that their name's been written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And as long as I get to heaven, that's all that matters. And that's not what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to begin to make disciples. And ultimately, on a personal level, discipleship isn't about one person pouring everything into you that they've got. It's first of all about you waiting on the Lord. and allowing the Holy Spirit and His Word to pour into you. It's about allowing the body of believers to pour into you. It's about allowing pastors, evangelists, teachers, prophets, the fivefold ministry pour into you. It's about being teachable. It's about allowing those around you who are more mature in the Lord to pour into you. But most people don't like being told what to do. And if you don't like being told what to do, if you don't like somebody helping you, then you are going to be really bad at discipleship. You're going to be really bad at growing in the things of God. And when you look at this concept, like he literally said in verse 20, to obey everything I have commanded you. I was just kind of trying to put this in context because this is Jesus' teaching. And do you guys understand that back in the day they didn't have Bibles? Like what we're talking about? They had scrolls, and everything's handwritten. So it's not like, the average, follower of Jesus had a pack of 500 and some scrolls that they got to tote around. What scroll are you on? Well, I've memorized the first two, and no. Literally, if they wanted to get into the Word and get into teaching and figure out what it is that Jesus really commanded them to do, they'd literally have to make their way to the synagogue or sit under a rabbi or something and find a way to have somebody teach them and pour into their lives. And they would literally go out of their way. They would make time. They would sit. They would listen. They would ask questions. They would grow. We can't even pull our phone out when it's right there. And it's like, oh, that's so much work. Oh, my finger, I'm done scrolling. That's like 3 screens I've gone through. You know what I mean? We make it so complicated and so hard, but yet, do you realize how beautiful it is that we even have the Word of God, that we have the ability to truly learn everything that He's commanded us to do, and we can sit there and we can glean from it. We don't have to make really dumb decisions. We don't have to look like a fool. I'm just throwing that out there. Because every time we do something foolish, it's because we either haven't read and studied this, or we haven't made the decision to apply it to our lives. I put that one into falsetto for you because it's really important. I wanted to emphasize it. So as I was thinking about this concept, so obviously salvation's a free gift. And speaking of salvation, if you guys remember my wife's message from 2 weeks ago about Smile, Jesus Loves You, we finally got these cards printed. There's some more in the back if you want to pick them up. Apparently I can't breathe or talk today at the same time. But salvation is wonderful, and salvation is a free gift. But the reality is this: it's a free gift that demands everything of you. And some people don't grasp that concept. That's the very concept of salvation, is you are giving everything to Christ. You are laying down your life the same way He laid down His. You're surrendering everything. That's why it's called a prayer of salvation, and we say to make Jesus the Lord of your life, because you're giving everything. But that's not how people fully grasp or perceive that. They're like, oh, wait a minute. I just want a few things. It's kind of like you're pulling up through the drive-thru, right? And you're like, today I'm feeling like, a Big Mac with no onions. That's what I like right there, okay? Right? That's what I'm feeling. And that's how we treat God. We pull up to do our devotions, and we're like, okay, God, here's what I'd like for today. I'd like you to change my spouse. I'd like you to fix my kids. I'd like you to make a giant deposit in my bank account, right? And that's our mindset when it comes to the things of God. And that's not how we're supposed to do it. That is the fast food Christianity mindset. And that's not the way God's designed it. But as I was thinking about this, and you're going to think this might be a little abstract, but I want to go to the book of 2 Kings. And there's a gentleman in 2 Kings that you may have heard about, a man by the name of Naaman. And it's in 2 Kings chapter 5. And I want to kind of tell his story a little bit, because I think there's some elements that we can really learn from him. Now, if you start looking at his life and you start reading in chapter 5, verse 1, it talks about how Naaman was a commander of the army of the king of Aram. So here's Naaman, who's like second in command, basically, for the kingdom of Syria. Like second in command. So he is up there, right? He's serving the king, and it goes on, and it says, he was a great man in the sight of his master, and he was highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. Now, kind of an interesting side note is, do you guys understand that God is ultimately in control? And Aram was actually one of the enemies of Israel. But yet somehow God was allowing Naaman to get some victories. Now, it doesn't say specifically over Israel, but it says that God was moving, right? And there was stuff going on in his life and in their kingdom because God was giving them the victory. It's not that he was so great. Just throwing that out there. Isn't it amazing how we want to take credit for so many things? But let's keep looking, because that's not really my message in there. It says he was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. So somehow through his process of living, he came down with leprosy. And if you guys know anything about leprosy, it's a pretty horrible skin disease. And it's something that slowly begins to eat away at you. I'm sure you women couldn't handle this, but one of the things it does is it gets rid of your eyebrows and your eyelashes. Can you imagine that? Just throwing that out there. That would freak most women out right there, right? So here's what happened. So here he is. He's this second in command. He's got this position in the world. He's got this authority. He's got these victories. People are looking up to him, but he's got this issue. And he's got this issue that is a nagging issue. And it's one that he can't get rid of on his own. And it's something that he obviously mentally has to battle on a regular basis and physically battle. And it says, now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. So obviously, they had sent out some raiding parties, so they'd gotten some victories or something over Israel, and they had brought back this little servant girl. And she says to her mistress, she says, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. So here's this little girl who knows of the prophet in Israel, and she is confident that he would be able to heal her. And she's moved with compassion, even though she's been taken captive. Like, just think about that. How, unselfish that is. She's looking at her master. She's a slave. She's been taken captive, and she has empathy for what's going on in his life. And she's like, he needs to meet the man of God. And if he would have an encounter with the man of God, he would be healed. So what happens? Well, it goes on here. It says, Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. So obviously she talked with his wife, and you know how wives are. They tell everything to their husbands. And so he heard, okay, I need to go see this prophet in Israel. So he goes to tell the king. And the king says, by all means, you need to go. I want you to go. And I'm actually going to send a letter with you to the king. So he's like, I see what's wrong. I see what's going on in your life. I know you need a victory here. So even though it's our enemy, if they have someone there who can heal you, then I want you to go. So one king writes a letter to the other king. And then here's good old Naaman. He packs up. It says, as soon as he got the letter, it says he packed up how much was it here? 10 talents of silver. That's it's about 750 pounds of silver. 6,000 shekels of gold. That's about 150 pounds of gold. And 10 really cute outfits. I guess outfits were a thing back then, right? So he's like, I'm going to go and I'm going to buy myself a healing. I'm going to take of everything I've amassed. This is what I've got. I've got a letter from the king, and I've got all this stuff. So him and his chariots, they pack up, and they go to see the king of Israel. The king of Israel gets the letter, and he's like, wait a minute. Do you think I'm God that I can just heal your servant? Pastor's quoting it for me over here. Right? He's like, can you imagine being a king, and your enemy hands you a letter and says, here is, my servant, and I want you to heal him. He's like, what? He literally goes, are you trying to stir up like a fight or something here? Like, what's going on? Well, sure enough, wind of it gets to Elisha. And Elisha says, just send him over to me. So here's Naaman, all his chariots, all his stuff, 10 cute outfits, and hundreds of pounds of money in gold, silver, right? There's sometimes some stuff in the Bible you're like, why? Like, I don't get that. Why? Right? But anyway, so and he knocks on the door of Elisha. Well, Elisha doesn't even answer the door. He sends somebody else to answer the door, and he goes, here's what I want you to tell him. I want you to tell him to go down, to the river, and he's going to have to dip 7 times, and if he dips 7 times, he's going to be healed. Naaman is livid. He's completely livid. Why? Because he thought that Elisha would come out, oh, you're second in command. Oh, you're so important. You're so valuable. And he thought Elisha would do a little, I can't even snap. There we go. Do some kind of little snap or wave thing, and he would be instantly healed. And he's agitated. He was wanting some fast food, like right now. I want my healing. I want it now. I brought the goods. I'm ready to pay for it. Give me what I want. But he wasn't willing to do what Elisha had told him to do. And again, precious servants are like, why won't you do it? Don't you want healed? If he asked you to do something amazing and huge, wouldn't you do it? So why won't you do the one simple thing he asked you to do? So finally, Naaman humbles himself, and he goes down, and he dips in the river 7 times. I can't imagine what would have been going through his mind. Like, you go down the first time, and you're like, okay, that didn't work. Really? You want me to do this again? Okay, I'll do it again. How long is this going to take? I don't see any change. It's not getting a little better every time. Like, I don't see the progress. Why do I have to keep going through these steps? Why do I have to keep doing this? Because you were told to. It's about humility. It's about obedience. And finally, on the 7th time, he's healed. Now, it's an interesting story because when you look at Naaman's response afterwards, it's totally different. You see, after he's healed, he comes back, and now he still wants to give gifts. But this time, he's not wanting to give to get. He's just wanting to give because he was so blessed, because God touched his life, because God's healed him. And he's like, I just want to give nothing. Like, God, thank you. I want to worship the one true God. And not only that, he immediately, I believe, began to reflect upon his entire life. And he goes to Elisha and he goes, I want to ask for forgiveness already. He's literally reflecting upon his life and what he has to go back to. And he's like, I'm second in line to the king. And when the king goes to worship his God, I have to put my arm in his, and I've got to take him into his temple to worship his God. And I know that if he bends over to worship his God, that I'm going to end up bending over, but I'm not worshiping. I'm not. But I can't change that circumstance. But I want you to know it's not what I want to do. And I love that Elisha just says, just go. Just go, it's going to be all right. You're healed physically, And I believe by the response of him looking at his entire life, he was made whole spiritually as well. And he had made a decision that I am going to worship the one, the true living God. And he just looking at his life and saying, okay, there's some changes I'm going to have to make. And so as I was thinking about this concept, I was thinking about why is it so hard for Christians to be discipled, to grow up and to mature? And I feel like it's because there's some lines that we're not willing to step into, because they're long lines. And we don't like long lines. We don't like the process. We don't like the pain. We don't like the transition and the change. But the first line that I think to truly become a disciple that we have to be willing to go down is the line of denial. Now in Luke 9:23 it says that if anyone wants to be my disciple, they have to deny themselves, pick up their cross, and follow me. This concept of denial, it literally means refusing to acknowledge a person. So to deny yourself as a believer, it is to refuse to acknowledge your own personal wants and desires because your life is no longer yours, it belongs to Christ. But you understand that we still have this carnal body. We receive the Holy Spirit when we make Jesus the Lord of our life, but we still have to walk it out in the flesh, but by the power of the Spirit. And that's why he says you've got to die daily. So there is this line of denial that starts when you make Jesus the Lord of your life, and you're in it for the rest of your life. Every desire, every want, every craving, every dream, everything belongs to him. And you have to continually, day after day, say, not my will, but yours be done. Some people last a day in that line. Some people last a week. Some a month. Some maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years. But till the day you die, we have got to stay in that line of denial where we are constantly putting down our flesh and saying, God, not my will, but yours be done. It's called letting go of your old habits. It's called letting go of your old priorities. It's called letting go of maybe old relationships. It's letting go of a whole host of whatever it is that you need to let go of to deny yourself and focus on Christ. But it's a journey and it's a process. And you may not even know what you have to let go of tomorrow. But don't worry about it, because that's tomorrow. Focus on today. What's God asking you today to let go of? And the reason why he wants you to deny yourself is because what he has is so much better for you. Do you realize that Naaman had to finally just, okay, I'm going to humble myself, and I'm going to do exactly what it is that the man of God is telling me to do. 2 Kings 5, 11 and 12. I just want to read that. It says, Naaman went away angry, and he said, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, that he'd wave his hand over the spot, and he'd cure me of my leprosy. That's what I thought he was going to do. And then it says that he turned off and in a rage. That's amazing how many Christians do that. Seriously, God? This is ridiculous. What else? What else do I have to give up? What else do I have to surrender? Why? Why do I have to do this? Why is this so hard? Why am I not getting the results I want? But you see, on the other side of obedience and denial was healing. And if you truly want healing for your heart, for your soul, for your mind, for your marriage, for your family. It is on the other side of denial because you cannot do that stuff on your own. You cannot be good enough. You can't buy it. You cannot achieve it on your own. It's only done through Christ. But so many of us are not willing to shift our mindset and go down that road. John 15, 18 and 19 says, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. You see, if you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you don't belong to the world. But I have chosen you out of the world, and that is why the world hates you. So part of this denial is the natural, but also part of the denial is the things of the world, where it's like, okay, wait a minute, as a believer, I'm not going to think like the world. I'm not going to act like the world. I'm not going to live like the world. I'm not going to process like the world. I'm not going to be moved like the world is. That's not how we're supposed to live. But he literally says, if you belong to the world would love you. I just want to throw this out there. If you, as a believer of Jesus Christ and a genuine follower, don't ever step on toes by your lifestyle and actions and the way that you love so well, then there's probably a chance you have not denied the world. Because if they love you and have no pressure and no conviction when you're around them, then something's wrong. Your light should be so bright that they're pushing back or they're drawing in. It's going to be one of the two. They're either going to want what you have or they're going to push back. And I think too many times we're trying to be just like the world, even in the church. We want to be so relatable. Well, I want to be relatable on the level that, yes, we're all sinners saved by grace. But other than that, what we have to offer, it's not what the world has to offer. And what the world needs is what they're not getting in the world. They need what God has to offer. So we have got to make this shift of mindset. We have got to stand in this really hard, long line of denial where every day we're saying, okay, it's not about me. I don't need that. I don't want that. It's not worth my time, not worth my effort, not worth my finances. God, there's more important things to do. And we begin to walk it out. Here's the next thing. Oh, wait, I want to show you this. That's a kid's cup from McDonald's. And when you first go to McDonald's, you don't even get to pick. Your parents pick for you. And this is what you get to drink from. It's a kid's cup. But it's a step up from a baby bottle. You finally get to have something a little more exciting, right? It's a step up. So it's a step of growth. But I want to give you perspective. This line of denial, kid's cup. That's just the starting point of growth. Here's the next line I want to talk about. It's the line of obedience. 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 13 and 14. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, you would have done it. How much more when he tells you, just wash and be cleansed?" Like, come on, it's not that hard. It's really simple, right? Just do what he's telling you to do. So verse 14, so he went down and he dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored, and he became clean like that of a young boy. So it was the obedience. It was his obedience to what God was saying through the man of God. Your obedience is what's going to cause transformation and change in your life. When you begin to walk out in obedience, it's not just knowing, it's doing. When you begin to do the things that God's called you to do, when you begin to apply these principles to your life, there's the general ones, but then there's also the specific ones. Believe it or not, there's some things that are a sin for you that aren't a sin for me. Because sin is just simple disobedience to God. And if God's asked you to do something and you don't do it, The Bible clearly says that's a sin. So obedience is all about learning to listen to God's voice, to understand his word and his principles, and to do what he says. Again, Mark 16, 15, 16. This is another one of the Great Commission style verses. Jesus said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned." Now, here's why I went to this really simple verse. There's believers in this room who haven't even taken the first silly, simple step of obedience and gotten baptized. It's like the first thing you do. You make Jesus Christ the Lord of your life, you get baptized. You get water baptized. It happens after you make him the Lord of your life. The very word baptized means to be completely immersed. That means you get in water somewhere, like a baptismal tank right here, and you let everybody know, I have made Jesus Christ the Lord of my life, and then you go down under that water, which symbolizes that you're dying to yourself. In other words, I'm going to get in the line of denial right here. That's what I'm saying. And I'm going to come up alive to Christ, and I'm going to walk out not only in this line, but I'm going to put my other foot in this line, and I'm going to walk down the line of obedience as well. And I'm going to do everything that God's called me to do. Maybe if you're struggling with obedience and big things, you got to break it all back down and start with the simple things. Get baptized if you've never gotten baptized. It's a starting point, right? And then you just begin to do it step by step, whatever it is that God's called you to do. Those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God, right? That's the way it works. We've got to start this journey. John chapter 8, verses 31, here's what it says. It says, to the Jews who had believed in him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, that's when you're really my disciples. Hold to doesn't mean I have 10 Bibles, I got 4 Bible apps, and I carry them with me. I'm holding on to them. Holding to them means you understand and you do. You're actually doing it. You're walking out in obedience. It says, verse 32, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Oh, so again, obedience produces results in your life. Yes, if you're not walking in freedom from anything, then it's time to get into God's presence and into his word, look into your heart, and figure out where the disobedience is. He's not withholding from you. He's given to you. But we've got to get our heart, our life, and our mind lined up with his. And we've got to be, it says, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Verse 34, it says, very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Now I want to go back to Naaman for a second, because I see another principle that is so obvious in my life and in probably some of your lives. Naaman was searching for an answer for the problem. And he came face to face with the answer, and he didn't like it. He had an inner turmoil. I don't want to do this. Doesn't make sense. Why? Why do I have to do it? Why do I have to go down to that river? Why does it have to be the Jordan River? Why do I have to do it 7 times? Like, why? Not willing to just settle that God knows. And if God says it, I'm going to do it. And that's where so many of us are at. We come face to face with the reality. You come here on a Sunday morning and you hear the truth about what you need to fix what's going on in your situation or in your life, and you wrestle with it. Oh, it's too hard. I don't think I can do it. I don't think I want to do it. I don't think I should have to do it. Whatever it is, and you start this battle. But at some point, you've just got to humble yourself and say, okay, God, I'm going to do what you're asking me to do. And when you start walking out in simple obedience, that's where freedom, that's where victory, that's where the real living is. That's where you want to be. But you've got to make that decision. And again, that's like one of those growth steps. You know, you're not just a kid anymore. You're starting to grow up a little more, spiritually speaking. And you're starting to understand, okay, every day I got to walk out. It's not just about denying myself. It's about saying yes to God, whatever it is he's asking me to do, even if it doesn't make sense. You mean if I don't forgive, then I won't be forgiven, but I don't want to forgive. Then you're not going to be forgiven. You've got to do it. You've got to take God at his word. You've got to be willing to. It's that maturity. Maturity is understanding that there might be somebody who knows more or better than you. Just throwing that out there, right? So it's going from this to this. So then there's one more line I want to talk about. And I want to call this one the line of stewardship. And again, I think Naaman gave us a beautiful example. I already alluded to it, but in 2 Kings 5:15, it says, Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him. This is after he was healed, and he said, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. You don't know how he knew? He walked out in obedience. He actually took God at his word and did it, and God honored his word, and it rocked his world. And he said, so please accept a gift from your servant. So immediately he understood, wait a minute, I want to bless God. God has blessed me. I want to bless God. And so that kind of brings up the stewardship thing. So that's immediately finances or outfits, clothing, I guess. You can throw that one in there too, right? wanting to be a blessing. But in verse 18, this is the other one I was talking about. He said, but may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing that he can't change. He says, when my master enters the temple to bow down and he's leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. I don't want to do it. I can't change this. So he's immediately trying to make sure that the stewardship of his time, the stewardship of what he represents, his character and everything, that it would honor God. He was trying to make sure of it. And I think when you truly are being discipled, everything in your life will begin to be about stewardship. Your time, your talents, treasure, all of it. It's all going to be about being a good steward. Luke 16:10-11 says, whoever's faithful with very little will also be faithful with much. Whoever's dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been faithful with worldly wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? There's this stewardship principle where if we're not honoring God, he's not going to bless us. And I want to be blessed so that I can be a blessing. The more I have, the more God can do through me to bless others. It's about being a conduit. And if you're going to keep it all to yourself and you're not going to be a blessing, then God's not going to bless you with more because he knows that you're a Dead Sea. And he wants to flow through us. But then I was thinking of this verse in Ephesians chapter 4:11-13. And this really jumped out to me with stewardship. It says, so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and the teachers to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So there's this stewardship of what God's given us with our gifts and our talents, that not only are we supposed to use them, we're supposed to use them for the body so that the whole body is built up. Now, we do Growth Track once a quarter. We have another about 40 people or so going through Growth Track, which is awesome. It's an opportunity where you can find out about our church and where you can find out where you can serve and be a healthy, functioning part of a body. You see, part of discipleship and growth is when you begin to come to church, not just to get, but also to give. Because when you give, you receive. But if all you ever do is you come in and you try and amass knowledge or understanding or whatever, then I'm sorry, there's a point where you might have way more knowledge than me. You might have more biblical theology that, you've spent more time studying, so you beat me on that. But guess what? It's not about your knowledge. It's about what God's placed inside of you for the body. And when we come together, it's to serve one another. And if we're not stewarding our gifts, if we're not willing to give and to serve and to pour into one another, then we're missing the mark. When we give you an opportunity to be a healthy, functioning part of the body, it's so that you can be blessed, and it's so that those around you can grow and become all that they're called to be. You see, a lot of times we think discipleship. I remember when I was at Bible college, I was so crabby because there wasn't one person who said, I'm going to take Danny on and disciple him. Danny's my man. What did it just say here? Pastors, prophets, evangelists, teachers. And then it goes on and says the whole body. So what that means is, not only are we supposed to give to one another, we're supposed to learn and glean from one another. And if you go back in Ephesians chapter 4 there, it talks about submitting one to another. And the very concept of submission is that you understand the value and worth that each person has. And if you submit to one another, that means that you're coming under a mission or a vision that you couldn't do by yourself. We could not do as pastors what we're doing as a church without all of you. If I tried to do it by myself, it would flop. But as we come together and we each do our part, submitting to one another, understanding that we each play a role for a bigger picture, then more is accomplished. That's the beauty of submission. That's the beauty of stewarding our gifts and talents and working together. Isn't it crazy that Naaman, second in command, had to be encouraged and nudged by a POW? Right? Little POW who cared more about him than obviously he must have cared about her. Isn't that wild? But he had to make a decision. Am I going to receive? So when you start walking the line of stewardship, you're really starting to grasp. You're really starting to open up your life to be poured into. Right? That's a big step. That's a big step. But as I was thinking about this concept, I was reminded of a verse. Here's what it says in 2 Corinthians 3:18. And I'll close with this one. It says, "And we all, who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, we're going to be transformed into His image with ever increasing glory." Ever increasing. You see, we all want I remember when I first got saved. Yeah, I remember when I used to wrestle with that, but, I got to this. But now I'm a pretty big deal. I got this figured out. I'm walking all three of those lines, right? Right? That's our mindset. But again, that is so limiting because when it comes to God, He's got so much more. What does it say there? Ever increasing glory. And I think sometimes if we don't think about it, we limit God. And He's got something that is so much bigger. We want to stick in that little realm. And we want to drink and have God fill us in a little way. But yet if we allow God to begin to do something in us, ever increasing, like, what's the limit? I don't want there to be a limit. I don't want to know how big this straw is. I just want you to know there's more. There's more. Don't limit God. This whole process of, I just want it now. This is all I want. This is all I need. No, we've got to get in line. We got to be willing to take the time, those long lines of denial, whether it takes 5 minutes in your prayer closet or 2 hours in your prayer closet wrestling with your flesh. Don't come out until you've denied yourself and you're willing to pick up your cross. And you've got to be willing to walk this out day after day and say, okay, wait a minute. God, I want to do what you've called me to do. I want to be who you've called me to be. I want the results. I'm willing to walk in complete obedience, even when it doesn't make sense. Don't be so proud to do something little for God. Patty, I'm proud of you. It's amazing the little things we do. She brought some friends to church today. It's amazing what a little step of obedience opens another door. That opens another door. But you got to do it one day at a time. God, what are you asking me to do? And by the way, if you don't ever ask, you're not going to hear. That's just the way it works. If you don't want to hear what God's asking you to do, you can very definitely not hear. I know what to do in my life if I don't want to hear. But I also know what I need to do if I want to hear. And if I want to walk that line of obedience, man, it's a long line. And man, I don't get the results sometimes that I want in the timing that I want, but I stick it out because I know that God's way is better than my way. God's way is better than the world's way. And I want to stand before him someday and hear, well done, good and faithful servant. I would rather die in faith, walking in obedience, than live a life of disobedience with the guilt and condemnation that comes with it. And then that line of stewardship, that's just such a beautiful thing. Because that's the opportunity that's endless. The more you trust God, the more you lay at his feet, the more you allow him to be a part of what's going on in your life. It's endless. It's endless. If God's been doing some awesome things in your life, I rejoice with you. But don't stop. Don't stop. Don't think this is it. Don't think it's over. There's so much more. Fast food Christianity, whip in, get what I want, I'm done, throw it away. God, he just keeps on giving. He just keeps on giving.